what we've talked about so far, a little bit about how traits are passed on. So now we're talking about how we take all of this long strings of DNA and we get it nicely, neatly by wrapping it all very tightly around some proteins. Okay, we'll finish after lunch. Whoops. So, for each one of these, we've got all this DNA. We wrap it around some protein. And now we have this nice, neat package called a chromosome. Okay? Nice, neat package. This is vocabulary. This is notes. You should be writing this down. And you probably want to draw some pictures too, especially if you're a visual learner. And why is this chromosome so important? Because it's a nice, neat way to organize the DNA. Yeah, it's a way to keep the DNA in a usable form. So this is like a filing system where you just throw everything into your locker and then throw more stuff on top of it. The odds of finding any one piece of paper at the moment that you need it are slim. Some of you probably know this. Versus having a nice, neat file cabinet where you can walk over and pull out exactly the thing you need, exactly when you need it. I will never know that sensation, clearly. It's okay. That's what your chromosomes do, is they keep that DNA organized so that any one piece of it can be accessed by your body at any one time.
What does it say wrap with?
Wrap around some protein. Sorry. Messy, messy, messy. It's my life. Okay, so we've got chromosomes, yes? This is an actual picture of somebody's chromosomes. It's called a karyotype. I don't know why they don't call it a chromosome type. It's beyond me. But a karyotype is an actual picture. It's an image of all the chromosomes. Okay? We could take a karyotype for you. We could take a cell in your body. We could go to the part in that cell where the DNA is stored, wrapped around the proteins in the form of chromosomes. And this is a means of laying those out, and you see all of them. What do you notice? Well, yeah, they're different sizes. They're not all the same size.
They look like feet.
In that there are pairs of them. Okay, that's a good observation. There are pairs of them. How many pairs do you see? Well, that's a pair, and that's a pair, and that's a pair, and that's a pair. Yeah, there are 23 pairs. So this is a human here because there are 23 pairs of chromosomes. Other species have different numbers of chromosomes. I think carrots have like 1,800 chromosomes or something. It's crazy. And I think fruit flies have like 4 pairs of chromosomes. So they're, it varies tremendously. We're going to get rid of this. Okay. So humans have 23 pairs of chromosomes. If you have 23 pairs of chromosomes, how many chromosomes do you have total? 46. Of that 46, how many do you think you got from your mama? 23. How many do you think you got from your papa? 23. Of these pairs, in every single case, one is from your mother, one is from your father, one is from your mother, one is from your father, one is from your mother, one is from your father. For each of those pairs, you got one of chromosome number 1 from your dad and 1 from your mom. You got one of chromosome number 2 from your dad and 1 from your mom. You got one of chromosome number 3. You get the picture. Now, the first 22 pairs, let me get rid of all this stuff. The first 22 pairs of chromosomes have a special name. They are called autosomes. Okay, so that's the first 22 pairs. So those first 22 pairs, these are the genes that are on those first 22 pairs are basically the things that control your whole body. So functions, this is regular body functions, and color, shape, size of your features, everything about this makes up all of the normal stuff that we think of as your genetic material. Okay. This last pair also have a special name. These are the sex chromosomes. Guess what they determine?
Your sex.
Your sex. Your biological sex. So, you got one of them from your mama and one of them from your papa. Okay, so let me shrink autosomes here. Yeah, the sex chromosomes are what determine your biological sex. When I say your biological sex, I mean your actual genitals. That's biological sex. Okay, now, depending on which sex chromosomes you have, you will either be female or male biologically. If you get two X chromosomes, you know what you are? Biologically? That is biological female. Okay? Biological female. Biological girl. If you get an XY, what's left? That's biological male.
What if you get 2Y?
Ah, good question. So, let's talk about where the X and the Y come from. So, if you are a biological female, what could you possibly pass on to your offspring?
Wait, what?
If you're a female, so if we're talking about you and all your cells have an XX in them, what could you possibly pass on to your offspring? You can pass on either an X or an X.
So they have to be female.
Well, no, remember you got to get two to be male or female. If you're a male, you can pass on either an X or a Y. So if you are the product of, and we're going to do a lot more with this, don't worry if it's a little confusing right now. If you are the product of a male and a female, an egg and a sperm, you can't get two Ys.
What if? What's like a transgender one?
Okay, that's the next question that always comes up with this. So transgender is not the same as transsex. So let's differentiate for a minute between biological sex. Notice that I've been emphasizing biologically female, biologically male.
How big these
Sex is, hold on, sex is your genitals. That's whether you have a penis or a vagina. That's got nothing to do with whether you feel like you're a boy or you feel like you're a girl. Gender is when you feel like you're a boy or you feel like you're a girl. Okay? And if you are born into this world and what's between your legs and between your ears matches, life is pretty easy for you. You know, if whatever genitals you have line up with who you feel like you are, then that's a pretty easy path. If what's between your legs and what's between your ears doesn't match, life is more challenging for you. Okay? Because you are constantly fighting the notion of who you are. And that's pretty fundamental to you. If you feel like a girl, you can't really make yourself feel like a boy. If you feel like a boy, you can't make yourself feel like a girl. And that's in the brain. That is, and it's biological, but it's hormonal and chemical. And that is in your brain. And I mean, the science is pretty clear on this at this point. You know, it's not something that's made up. It's not something that people imagine. It is neurological. It is chemical. What's in your brain is what tells you if you're a boy or a girl. What's between your legs usually lines up, but for some people it doesn't, and they have a harder life because they're constantly fighting that notion. Okay. So trans sex, the other piece of this is that when a baby is born, what's the first question people ask? And actually, they don't even ask it when they're born anymore. They ask it at 20 weeks when you go for the big ultrasound now. Is it a boy or a girl? That's what they all want to know. There are people for whom, at birth, when they say, is it a boy or a girl, the response is, we're not sure. There are people who have what are called ambiguous genitals. So these are people who may have basically a micropenis. It's a very, you understand that the genitals of males and females come from the same tissue. They're formed out of the same material in utero. If it grows, it's a penis. If it doesn't, it's a clitoris. So it's the same exact tissue. There are individuals who are born and their genitals, like, they don't quite have a vagina, they don't quite have a penis, they may have some features of both. That's another one where that's tough. That's a tough life. What they used to do to those people, I don't say for, I say to those people, was at birth, a decision would be made. This is going to be a boy. And they would do surgery to make it look boyish the best they could. Now, there were some of those people who had that done to them who then get to puberty or get even to, 5 or 6 or 7 years old, and they've been told their whole life, you're a boy, you're a boy, you're a boy. But they've never felt like a boy. There were so more commonly what they do today is when a child is born with what they call ambiguous genitals, meaning we can't really tell what that was originally going to be. Something happened in the process. Very often they kind of raise those kids, I won't say without gender, but sort of neutrally. Give them lots of opportunities. Don't talk too much about is it a boy or a girl. They may be named something ambiguous. Because you're kind of waiting for the kid to tell you if they're a boy or a girl.
So they just leave both things there at that time?
They often don't do any kind of surgery until after adolescence. Because when you understand, and you've all gone through this at your age, there are chemical changes that occur in your body at adolescence. That's what causes changes to your body. For people who are born with ambiguous genitals, when the chemicals of adolescence kick in, it may become more clear. Oh, this is trending towards male. The hormones are there. This is probably somebody who is going to feel more male. This is probably somebody who should have male genitals. This is probably somebody who should have female genitals. So, those are not easy lives to imagine being in. And then the question of attraction is a whole different thing because that's unrelated to biological sex and to gender. Who you want to kiss. Who you're interested in kissing. You can't control it any more than you can control whether you feel like a boy or a girl. It's in the brain. It's chemical. It's the hippocampus specifically. And your brain is wired for something. And you can't tell your brain to be wired for something it's not wired for. So if your genitals and your gender and who you want to kiss all line up to make your life easy, then your life is easy. As easy as it can be. If those three things line up in unusual ways, then it's not so easy. There are conditions where people some of the unusual combinations of sex hormones. There are people who get an XXO. They receive 3 sex hormones, XX. There's XXX and there's XXY. There are people who receive 3 sex hormones, and these are each, we'll talk about them, they're genetic disorders. They have a series of characteristic physical conditions. I forget which one is Turner's syndrome. Turner syndrome is one that affects females. I believe that is XXX. So basically, this person got an X from their mom, an X from their dad, and an extra X, usually from the mother. And those women tend to have some real characteristic. They have a very thick neck. They have a low hairline. They tend to be very short in stature. They tend to be very heavy. They tend to have reduced IQ. Not always. Mrs. Haylett has, I think it was an in-law or a relative, who has Turner's, and she's a nurse. You know, I mean, she's not what we would call, or would have called at one point in time, you know, mentally retarded. Maybe she's not as bright as she would have been had her genes lined up differently, but she is a functional adult human being. She's a short, heavy woman. She's got a low hairline. She's got a very thick neck. She's got the physical characteristics. And she probably has some mental impairment, but nothing she can't work through, nothing she can't work past. So there are also the XXYs, and I have heard it posited. I believe it's XXY. Oddly enough, they call them superwomen. XXY women tend to be very tall, very slender. I have heard it said that a lot of fashion models, if you did genetic testing on them, would be XXYs. Very, you know, very, well, and if you think about it, that height, that slenderness, low body fat, those are all masculine characteristics. Women tend to carry more body fat than males. Why? Why do women tend to carry more body fat than males? Babies. You need energy to make babies. To store a baby in your body and grow it for 40 weeks requires energy. Females tend to store more body fat. So that low body fat, very tall, very slender, that's a more masculine thing. So, you know, and I don't have any evidence to prove that, but I have heard it said that probably a lot of fashion models would test out as XXY. Does that mean they're not women? No, they're women. If they feel like women, they're women, you know. They have female genitals. They, you know, may or may not line up with their brain, but there are more than those two combinations. The other one is XO. Maybe that's Turner's. One of those is Turner's, one is Klinefelter's. But XO is another variant. And that means you got an X chromosome from one parent and you got nothing from the other parent. So that's another possibility. Okay, so you've got these chromosomes. Questions, comments, concerns? The difference between the word normal and the word usual. What's normal for you is whatever you were born with. If you were born with an XXX, if you were born with ambiguous genitals, if you were born and your brain and your genitals don't match up, that's normal for you.
What if someone got two from the same parent and then none from the other?
If it still ended up as an XX or an XY, it would still, you know, still chromosomally works. XO, see, I can't remember if that's Turner's or Klinefelter's. That's another one where there are physical characteristics. There's typically some mental retardation that goes with it. It doesn't, we're just saying them in one order. That doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. Yeah, whether it's, you know, I mean, you could say YX, XY. It doesn't matter. You've got one of each. So that part doesn't matter. But whatever is normal for you is your normal. That's different than usual or common or ordinary. So the most usual, the most common configuration is that, you know, XXs are biologically female and they feel like girls in their head. The most common is that XY are biologically male and they feel like boys in their head. You know, that's the most common. It's not the only way that it happens. And so whatever people are born with is normal for them. But it may be less usual. What we are going to do tomorrow, so we talked about sex chromosomes, autochromosomes, a little bit about biological sex. Tomorrow you're going to get gametes. Did anybody look it up? Oh, okay. Tomorrow's going to be gamete day. So when you walk in here, you will all receive a gamete of your very own. I know you're excited about it. You're a little bit nervous after today's conversation? No, it's not disgusting or alive. So the only thing that's not disgusting